My husband said, "My stepsister is pregnant with my baby, accept it or leave with nothing." I simply replied, noted, and silently left. That night, I began planning. When he was served the papers, his face froze at what I'd found. "Hello everyone. Thank you for being here with me today. Before I begin my story, I'd love to know which city you're joining us from. Please feel free to share in the comments. Now, let me take you into this story." The scent of roasting chicken and rosemary filled the kitchen. It was a Tuesday, and Tuesdays were my night to cook. For 23 years, Tuesdays had been roast chicken night. It was one of those small, steady rhythms that make up the bedrock of a long marriage. The oven timer was set for another 15 minutes, the potatoes were golden, and I was just wiping down the granite countertop I'd installed myself a decade ago. My name is Judith Carter, and for a living, I fix things. Faulty wiring, cracked foundations, leaky pipes, you name it, I can make it right. It's a satisfying job, taking something broken and making it whole again. I always believed the same principle applied to life, to marriage. I believed any crack could be sealed, any problem could be solved with the right tools and enough patience. I was wrong. I heard the sound of Russell's car pulling into the driveway, the familiar crunch of tires on gravel. Right on time. 6:15 p.m. Another steady rhythm. I smiled to myself, turning to pull 2 plates down from the cabinet. But when the front door opened, the draft that swept in felt cold. It wasn't just the autumn air. It was a different kind of chill, one that sinks right into your bones. He didn't call out his usual, "Honey, I'm home." There was just the sound of the door closing, followed by a heavy silence. I walked out of the kitchen and into the foyer, a dish towel still in my hand. And that's when my world stopped turning. Russell was standing there, his coat still on, his briefcase hanging limply from his hand. He wasn't alone. Standing slightly behind him, half hidden as if for dramatic effect, was his stepsister, Brenda. Brenda, who was 20 years younger than him. Brenda, whose college fund we'd helped contribute to. Brenda, who always called me Aunt Judith with a smile that never quite reached her eyes. "Russell? What's going on?" I asked. My voice sounded normal, but my stomach had already plummeted, like a stone dropped down a deep, dark well. He wouldn't look at me. He just stared at a spot on the hardwood floor, a floor I had painstakingly refinished myself 2 summers ago. "Judith," he said, his voice flat, devoid of any emotion. "We need to talk." Brenda stepped out from behind him then. She had one hand placed protectively over her stomach. It was a deliberate, theatrical gesture. Her eyes, unlike Russell's, met mine directly. They were filled with a triumphant, malicious gleam. And in that instant, I knew. Before a single word was spoken, I knew my life as I knew it was over. "Brenda's moving in with us for a while," Russell finally managed, still addressing the floor. I felt a bitter laugh bubble up in my throat, but I choked it down. "Moving in? What are you talking about? We don't have a guest room anymore, you know that." I turned it into my office. "She can take the office. You can work in your workshop," he said, waving a dismissive hand. Then came the final blow. He lifted his head, and his eyes were the eyes of a stranger. Cold. Hard. Uncaring. "She's pregnant, Judith," he said. "It's my child." The words hung in the air, thick and poisonous. The smell of rosemary and chicken suddenly seemed nauseating. 23 years of Tuesday nights, of shared jokes, of holding his hand while his mother was in the hospital, of building a life, a home, all of it turned to ash in that single moment. I just stared at him, unable to form a response. My mind was a whirlwind of white noise. He took my silence as an opportunity to press his advantage. He finally looked like the ruthless financial advisor he was, closing a deal. "So here's how it is," he continued, his voice taking on a cruel edge. "You will accept this. Brenda is staying here, and we will raise our child here, in this house. This is the new arrangement. He paused, letting the weight of his decree settle. Your other option is to leave. But if you walk out that door, you walk out with nothing. Not a single dime. I'll make sure of it in the divorce. I'll tie you up in court until you're broke and begging. So, you accept it, or you get out. He stood there, my husband of 23 years, next to his pregnant stepsister, in the home I had built and cared for, giving me an ultimatum. He was threatening me, erasing me, replacing me, all in one breath. He expected me to cry. To scream. To fall apart. But I didn't. Something inside me, something deep and foundational, just snapped. The part of me that felt pain went numb. The part of me that loved him died. In its place, something cold and hard and sharp began to form. I looked from his cold eyes to Brenda's smug face, and I saw them for what they were. Not family. Not even human, really. Just a problem. A broken thing. And I fix broken things. I slowly folded the dish towel in my hands, making the creases perfectly straight. I looked past them, towards the kitchen where the oven timer would soon be screaming. I took a deep, steadying breath. Noted, I said. My voice was quiet, eerily calm. Then I turned around, walked back into the kitchen, and silenced the timer. The chicken was probably ruined. It didn't matter. Nothing mattered anymore, except the silent promise I was making to myself. He thought he'd given me two options. He was wrong. I was about to create a third. I served dinner that night. I dished out the slightly overcooked chicken and the golden potatoes onto 3 plates instead of 2. I sat at the dining room table, the one we'd bought at an antique fair on our 5th anniversary, and I listened to them talk. Russell talked about his day at the office. Brenda talked about her morning sickness. They spoke as if I wasn't there, their voices weaving a new, suffocating reality around me. I didn't say a word. I just ate, my fork and knife making small, precise sounds against the ceramic plate. The food tasted like ash, but I chewed and swallowed mechanically. I needed to keep up the facade. I needed them to believe I was broken, defeated, a woman resigned to her fate. Camouflage is the first tool of any hunter. After dinner, I cleared the plates. Russell and Brenda went into the living room to watch TV, their laughter echoing down the hall, a fresh stab of the knife with every outburst. I finished washing the dishes, my hands steady in the warm, soapy water. I dried them, put them away, and wiped down the counters again. Routine was my anchor in the storm. I'm going down to the workshop for a bit, I called out, my voice even. Need to organize some things for a job tomorrow. Whatever, Russell grunted from the couch, not even turning his head. Perfect. To him, my workshop was just a basement full of dust and tools, a place he hadn't willingly entered in years. He had no idea it was the smartest room in the whole house. It was my sanctuary, my command center. And tonight, it was going to be my war room. I closed the heavy basement door behind me, the click of the lock sounding like the cocking of a gun. The air down here was different. It smelled of sawdust, machine oil, and solder, the smell of control, of creation. My tools were all hung in perfect order on the pegboard walls, wrenches and screwdrivers arranged by size, power tools on their charging stations, neat spools of wire in every color. This was my domain. A place where every problem had a logical solution. I didn't turn on the main overhead lights. Instead, I walked over to my main workbench and switched on a small desk lamp. It cast a pool of light over a bank of computer monitors. This was the heart of the system. What had started as a hobby, automating our home, was about to become my weapon. On the main screen, I pulled up the software I had written myself, a custom interface for the home's entire network. Lights, locks, thermostats, and of course, security. 2 years ago, after a string of break-ins in the neighborhood, I'd convinced Russell it was a good idea to install a state-of-the-art security system. It's a sound investment in our property value, I'd argued, speaking his language. He'd agreed, bored by the details, and just signed the checks for the equipment. He had no idea I didn't just install a standard system. I'd installed my system. I'd put discrete, high-definition cameras in every main room, the kitchen, the living room, the foyer, even the hallways. They were motion-activated, recorded audio, and fed directly to a secure, encrypted server I kept running on a dedicated machine right here in the workshop. For the past 2 years, they had been mostly dormant, just recording snippets of our daily lives. A cat chasing a sunbeam. Me leaving for work. Us eating dinner. Tonight, I reactivated every single one of them with a new set of protocols. I increased the microphone sensitivity. I set up alerts to ping my phone silently if motion was detected in specific zones after certain hours. I created a new, heavily encrypted folder on the server, labeling it simply, Project Nightingale. I sat there for hours, the cool blue light of the monitors reflecting in my glasses, my fingers flying across the keyboard. The grief from upstairs was still there, a cold, heavy lump in my chest. But something else was growing alongside it, a chilling, crystalline focus. He had threatened to leave me with nothing. He had brought his betrayal right into my home and told me to live with it. He thought he held all the cards. He thought he was the one in control. He was about to learn just how smart a simple contractor could be. He thought I fixed broken pipes. Tonight, I was starting the demolition of a broken life. His life. I opened a new document and began to type. Phase 1, Surveillance and Information Gathering. I was going to build a case against him so airtight, so damning, that by the time I was done, he wouldn't just give me half. He'd be lucky if I left him with the dirt under his fingernails. My house, my rules. He had just forgotten who made the rules in this house. The next few weeks were a masterclass in self-control. On the surface, I was the very picture of a defeated woman. I moved my work computer and files from the office into a corner of the workshop, surrendering the room to Brenda without a fight. I cooked their meals. I did their laundry, grimacing as I handled Brenda's clothes, the scent of her perfume a constant, cloying reminder of her presence in my home. I was a ghost in my own life, silent, observant, and utterly invisible to them. And that was exactly what I wanted. Every night, after they fell asleep, my real work began. I'd slip down to the cold, quiet basement, the monitors of my command center welcoming me like old friends. I'd pour myself a small glass of whiskey, the burn in my throat a welcome distraction, and I would review the day's recordings. It was torturous. It was like pressing a knife into a wound, twisting it deeper and deeper. I watched them on the living room couch, my couch, his arm around her as she rested her head on his shoulder. I saw them in the kitchen, him sneaking up behind her to kiss her neck while she made tea in my favorite mug. The footage was high definition, the audio crystal clear. I didn't miss a single whispered word, not a single stolen glance. And their words were the worst part. One evening, I captured a conversation that solidified the ice in my veins. They were in the living room, thinking I was asleep upstairs. "She's taking this surprisingly well," Brenda said, her voice dripping with a fake, syrupy concern. "I thought she'd put up more of a fight." Russell scoffed. I could hear the sound of him swirling his drink in its glass. "Judith? Nah. She's practical. She knows she's got no leverage. Her little contracting business barely makes enough to cover her own expenses. Everything, this house, the cars, our savings, it's all tied to my salary, my investments. She knows if she fights me, she loses. She's smart enough to know when she's been beaten." I sat there in the dark, my knuckles white as I gripped the edge of my desk. Beaten? He had no idea what a fight even looked like. Brenda giggled, a high, unpleasant sound. "Poor old Judy. She's probably just happy to have a roof over her head." It's a bit sad, really. She's so wrapped up in her little projects, her tools, and her wiring, she probably never even noticed you were unhappy. She's too boring to notice anything, Russell replied, and his words struck me harder than a physical blow. Reliable as a sunrise, but just as predictable. Sometimes I think she's more in love with that workshop of hers than she ever was with me. I saved the audio file, naming it Exhibit A. Every piece of footage, every damning conversation, was meticulously catalogued, dated, and backed up to 3 separate encrypted hard drives. One was hidden in the workshop, one in a safe deposit box at the bank, and one I sent to a secure cloud storage account under a false name. I was building my arsenal, piece by piece. During the day, I played my part. I'd pass them in the hallway and offer a thin, vacant smile. When Brenda would complain about some household issue, a flickering light or a drafty window, I would fix it promptly and efficiently. "Thank you, Aunt Judith," she'd say, patting her growing belly. "We have to make sure the house is perfect for the baby." Every time she said the baby, I felt a fresh wave of nausea. But I just nodded. I was the quiet, reliable, boring woman they thought they knew. The simple contractor, good with her hands but clueless about the world of lies and deceit they inhabited. They were growing more comfortable, more arrogant with each passing day. They had no idea that the silent, beaten woman fixing their leaky faucet was also the architect of their impending doom. They were living in a spider's web, and they were too busy congratulating themselves to notice the strands tightening around them. After 3 weeks of relentless surveillance within the house, I had a mountain of evidence of their affair. It was sickening, heartbreaking, and more than enough for any divorce lawyer to prove infidelity. But it wasn't enough to protect me from Russell's threat. He had made it clear he would use his financial power to crush me, to paint me as a vindictive, unstable woman and leave me penniless. Proving he was a cheater was one thing, proving he was a criminal was another. And to do that, I needed to get inside his real workshop, his office computer. Russell was a creature of habit and arrogance. He worked from home every Friday, locking himself in what used to be our shared study. He believed his world of high-stakes finance was far beyond my comprehension. That arrogance was about to become his biggest liability. I knew I needed a way to access his laptop, but I couldn't risk physically touching it. He was paranoid about his work files. So, I devised a plan that played to my strengths. One Thursday evening, I approached him while he was watching a baseball game. "Russell," I said, my voice carefully neutral. "The Wi-Fi has been really spotty in the north end of the house. I think the router signal is getting weak. I'm going to install a new mesh network system tomorrow to boost the signal everywhere. It'll make your video calls for work much smoother." He grunted, his eyes glued to the screen. "Fine, whatever. Just don't interrupt me while I'm on my calls." "I won't," I promised. "I'll need access to all the devices on the network to make sure they're configured correctly, including your work laptop. I can do it remotely from the workshop. I'll just need you to click accept when a security prompt pops up." Yeah, fine," he said, waving me away. The game was more important. The next morning, while he was on a conference call, I initiated my plan. From the safety of my basement, I sent a network request to his laptop. As I predicted, a small dialog box appeared on his screen. It looked like a standard network security certificate update. He glanced at it, annoyed by the interruption, and clicked allow without a second thought. But it wasn't a network update. It was a Trojan horse. A piece of custom software I had spent the last week perfecting. It was a silent, undetectable keylogger and remote access tool. In the 5 seconds it took him to click that button, I had complete and total access to his digital life. I was in. I spent the rest of the day in a state of high alert, my heart pounding in my chest. I watched from my monitors as a live feed of his screen appeared on mine. I saw the emails he was sending, the spreadsheets he was building, the private chats he was having with his colleagues. It felt like a tremendous violation of privacy, but I crushed that feeling down. He had shattered our privacy the moment he brought Brenda into our bed. This wasn't spying, this was self-preservation. I waited until late that night, long after he had finished work and was asleep upstairs next to his pregnant mistress. The house was dark and silent. I went down to the workshop, the only light coming from the screens that now held all of his secrets. I started digging. I navigated through his folders, his client lists, his portfolio management software. At first, everything seemed normal, just the mundane world of finance. But I knew there had to be something. Russell was too greedy, too arrogant to be completely clean. I just had to find it. I searched for hours, my eyes burning from staring at the screen, fueled by coffee and a cold, burning rage. And then, just as the first hints of dawn were breaking, I found it. It was a folder, buried deep within a subdirectory and deceptively named Old Tax Records. But the files inside weren't tax records. They were something far, far worse. The folder was password protected, but a man like Russell, who believed himself to be smarter than everyone else, often made simple mistakes. He used the same passwords for everything, rotating through a predictable set of names and dates. His mother's birthday. The date he started his company. Our anniversary. I felt a bitter twist in my gut as I typed in the date of our wedding. Access denied. I tried a few more. Nothing. Then, I had a hunch. I typed in Brenda's birthday. Access granted. The contents of the folder loaded onto my screen, and I felt my breath catch in my throat. This was more than just cheating. This was pure evil. Russell's most lucrative clients were retirees. Elderly people who had trusted him with their life savings, their nest eggs, the inheritance they planned to leave for their children. The folder contained 2 sets of financial statements for each of these clients. One was the official version, showing modest, safe returns from low-risk bonds and mutual funds. This was the version he sent to his clients. The other set, the real one, told a horrifying story. Russell was taking their money and secretly investing it in high-risk, speculative ventures, volatile tech stocks, shady offshore funds, everything a legitimate financial advisor would run screaming from. He was using their retirement funds as his personal slush fund for gambling. When the investments paid off, he would skim a huge percentage off the top, far more than his legal commission, and deposit it into a series of untraceable accounts. Then, he'd report the modest, fake returns to the clients. If the investments failed, the clients bore the entire loss, none the wiser, thinking it was just a minor market fluctuation. My hands were shaking as I clicked through the files. I saw the names of people I knew. Mr. Henderson, the sweet old man who always brought me tomatoes from his garden. Mrs. Gable, my former piano teacher, now a widow living on a fixed income. He was robbing them blind. These people had worked their entire lives, saved diligently, and placed their trust in him to safeguard their future. And he was bleeding them dry to fund his lavish lifestyle and support his mistress. I felt a surge of nausea so strong I had to grip the desk to steady myself. The affair was a betrayal of me. This was a betrayal of basic human decency. The man I had been married to for 23 years wasn't just a cheater, he was a predator. He preyed on the vulnerable, the trusting, the elderly. My mission suddenly became crystal clear. This was no longer just about securing my own future in a divorce settlement. It was about justice. It was about tearing down his entire corrupt empire and making sure he could never harm another innocent person again. I began the meticulous process of copying every single file. Every fraudulent statement, every illegal wire transfer, every email where he discussed these schemes with his offshore contacts. It took hours. I created a comprehensive dossier, a digital bomb of evidence so powerful it could not only end his career but likely send him to federal prison for a very, very long time. As I worked, the sun began to rise, casting a pale gray light through the small basement window. I looked at the mountain of evidence on my screen. This was his leverage. This was the source of the power he held over me. He thought his money made him untouchable. But I had just found the rot at the core of his foundation. And I, Judith Carter, the woman who fixes things, was about to bring the whole rotten structure crashing down. With the case against Russell all but gift-wrapped for the authorities, a part of me felt a grim satisfaction. But I knew it wasn't enough. Russell was a cornered animal, and he would lash out. Brenda was his justification, his symbol of a new life. The baby was the anchor of their story, the innocent victim in his narrative of a loveless marriage. To truly dismantle his world, I needed to dismantle that narrative. I needed to turn my attention to Brenda. I started where most investigations begin these days, the internet. Brenda had always been obsessed with social media, curating a perfect image of a sweet, fun-loving young woman. But people are never as careful online as they think they are. I spent a full day digging deep, going back years in her posts, her tagged photos, her friend lists. I cross-referenced her friends, looked at their public posts, and slowly began to piece together a picture of her life that was very different from the one she presented. She wasn't just a sweet college girl. She had a history of drama, of falling out with friends over money, of dating much older, wealthier men. But the real breakthrough came from a place I didn't expect. I found her profile on a few online forums dedicated to poker and online gambling. Using a throwaway username, I sifted through her post history. There it was. A long trail of panicked posts about losing money, about being in debt to shady online lenders, about needing a big score to get her life back on track. The dates of the most desperate posts lined up perfectly with the beginning of her affair with Russell. She hadn't fallen in love with him. She had targeted him. He was her big score. This was good, but it was still circumstantial. I needed something concrete. I turned my surveillance tools on her. I activated the microphone on the laptop she used in the former office, now her bedroom. I listened to her phone calls. Most were boring chats with friends, but one evening, I hit the jackpot. She was talking to a friend named Stacy. Her voice was low, conspiratorial. He totally bought it, Brenda whispered, followed by a triumphant little giggle. He's so desperate for a do-over, a new family, that he's not even thinking straight. But Bren, are you sure? Stacy's voice was tinny through the laptop speaker. What if he finds out? Finds out what? That I was seeing a few other guys around the same time? Please. He's not going to question it. He wants it to be his. His ego needs it to be his. My blood ran cold. I froze the recording, rewound it, and listened again. Seeing a few other guys around the same time. So you really don't know who the father is? Stacy asked, her voice a mix of awe and horror. Not a clue, Brenda said flippantly. Could be Russell, could be that bartender from the Salty Dog, could be that crypto bro I met on that app. Who cares? Russell's the one with the retirement accounts. He won the lottery. End of story. As long as he keeps paying off my debts and promises me a future, I'll be the perfect little mother-to-be. I leaned back in my chair, a cold, hard smile spreading across my face. I saved the recording, labeling it Exhibit B, the lottery. The baby, the one sacred, untouchable part of their story, was a lie. A tool of manipulation. Brenda wasn't building a family with Russell, she was executing a long con. I now had the evidence to destroy Russell's career and the evidence to destroy his personal life, his ego, and the very foundation of his betrayal in one fell swoop. He had built his new life on a throne of lies, and I had just found the detonator codes for every single bomb planted beneath it. The planning phase was over. It was time to light the fuse. The time for observation was over. The time for action had arrived. I couldn't just walk into a federal office and hand over the evidence that would immediately trace back to me and jeopardize my position in the divorce. The attack had to be surgical, anonymous, and untraceable. It had to look like it came from anywhere but inside this house. That Saturday, while Russell and Brenda went out for the afternoon to shop for baby furniture they'd announced with sickening sweetness, I put the next phase of my plan into motion. I went down to my command center, my heart a steady, rhythmic drum in my chest. There was no fear, no hesitation. Just a profound sense of purpose. First, I prepared the package for the authorities. I compiled all the evidence of Russell's financial fraud, the fake statements, the records of illegal transfers, the client lists, into a single, encrypted file. I wrote a short, anonymous cover letter, posing as a disgruntled former employee who had recently been fired. The letter explained the nature of the fraud in simple, direct terms and pointed them to the evidence in the attached file. Next came the delivery system. I used a public library's computer 2 towns over to purchase a VPN subscription and a secure, encrypted email service, paying with a prepaid gift card I'd bought with cash weeks ago. Total anonymity. Back in my workshop, routed through a server in Eastern Europe, I created the email account. I attached the encrypted file. The recipients were carefully chosen, a contact I found on the SEC's whistleblower tip line, the public email address for the nearest FBI field office, and the personal email of a well-known investigative journalist at the Baltimore Sun, a man famous for taking down corrupt businessmen. My finger hovered over the mouse for a single, fleeting second. This was the point of no return. In that moment, I thought about the 23 years. I thought about the promises we'd made. I thought about the man I thought I had married. Then, I thought about Mrs. Gable, my old piano teacher, and her dwindling savings. I thought about Russell's cold, dead eyes in the foyer. I clicked send. A small notification popped up, your message has been sent. It felt so simple, so anticlimactic, for an act that was about to detonate a man's entire life. I closed the email program, wiped the session, and digitally shredded every trace of the files from the temporary system I had used. It was done. The fuse was lit. All I had to do now was wait for the explosion. I spent the rest of the afternoon in my garden, pulling weeds. The physical labor was grounding. The sun was warm on my back. I methodically cleared the unwanted growth from around my rose bushes, my hands covered in dirt. It felt symbolic. I was weeding out the rot, making space for something new to grow. When Russell and Brenda came home, laughing and carrying bags from a high-end baby boutique, I was in the kitchen, washing vegetables for dinner. I looked up and gave them the same vacant, subservient smile I had perfected over the past month. "Find everything you were looking for?" I asked, my voice calm and even. "We did," Brenda chirped, holding up a tiny pair of designer baby shoes. "Aren't they adorable?" "Very," I said, turning back to the sink. "Dinner will be ready in an hour." They had no idea. They stood there, basking in the glow of their stolen future, completely oblivious to the fact that I had just signed their death warrant. The bomb was ticking, and they couldn't even hear it. It didn't take long. 48 hours, to be exact. It was a Monday morning. I was in the workshop, ostensibly organizing invoices, but in reality, I had a small window on my monitor showing a live feed from the camera in our living room. Brenda was on the couch, watching morning television. Russell was in his home office, on a video call. Everything was normal. Then, at 10:17 a.m., I saw it. 2 dark sedans pulled up in front of our house. They weren't police cars, but they had an unmistakable air of officialdom. 4 men in dark suits and a woman in a severe-looking pantsuit got out. They walked up our driveway with a brisk, no-nonsense pace. My heart began to hammer against my ribs. It was happening. I heard the sharp, authoritative knock on the front door. On my monitor, I saw Brenda jump, startled. She muted the TV and went to the door, peering through the peephole. I saw her recoil, her hand flying to her mouth. She opened the door just a crack. "Can I help you?" I heard her say, her voice trembling slightly. "We're here for Russell Carter," the woman in the pantsuit said, holding up a badge. "Federal Bureau of Investigation." Brenda went pale. She stumbled back as they entered the house. He's in his office. He's on a call. His call can wait, one of the men said, his voice a low rumble. I switched my camera view to the feed from the hallway outside the study. I watched as they approached the door. They didn't knock. One of the men simply turned the handle and pushed the door open. The audio picked up Russell's voice, mid-sentence. So if we reallocate the assets from the fixed income fund, we should see a significant. He stopped abruptly. What the hell is this? I'm in a meeting. Mr. Carter, the woman's voice was sharp as ice. I'm Agent Miller with the SEC, this is the FBI. You need to end your call. We have a warrant to search these premises and to seize your work-related materials. The sounds that followed were a symphony of destruction to my ears. Russell sputtering, protesting, his voice escalating from confusion to outrage to panicked fear. The agents speaking in calm, firm monotones. I saw them escort a pasty-faced, terrified Russell out of his office. They sat him down on the living room couch like a naughty schoolboy, right next to a sobbing Brenda. For the next 5 hours, I watched from the basement as they dismantled his life, piece by piece. They packed up his computers, his files, his phones. They were methodical, efficient, and utterly impersonal. Russell just sat there, his face a mask of disbelief, occasionally trying to argue with an agent, only to be shut down immediately. He had no idea where the attack had come from. In his mind, this had to be the work of a competitor, a disgruntled client, a technical glitch. The idea that the source of his ruin was a few feet beneath him, silently observing his downfall, would have been inconceivable. By late afternoon, they were gone. They left behind a ransacked office, a pile of legal documents on the coffee table, and 2 broken people sitting in stunned silence. The house was quiet, but it was the heavy, ringing silence after a massive explosion. Russell finally moved. He put his head in his hands, his body shaking. My life is over, he whispered, his voice cracking. It's all gone. Everything. Brenda, who had been crying hysterically, looked at him with wide, terrified eyes. What about me? She wailed. What about the baby? What's going to happen to us? Russell looked up at her, and for the first time, the adoration in his eyes was gone, replaced by a flicker of pure contempt. I don't know, Brenda, he snapped. I don't know. Down in my workshop, I took a slow, deliberate sip of my now cold coffee. This was not victory. Not yet. This was just the demolition phase. The real satisfaction would come later. This was just clearing the rubble before the main event. The federal investigation was a slow, grinding machine. In the weeks that followed, Russell was a ghost. He was out on bail, but his assets were frozen, his reputation shattered. His high-powered friends stopped calling. He spent his days in a fog of terrified phone calls with his lawyer and long, silent hours staring out the window. The confident, arrogant predator was gone, replaced by a shell of a man haunted by his own choices. The atmosphere in the house was toxic. The loving facade between him and Brenda had crumbled, replaced by whispered, bitter arguments. She accused him of ruining her life. He accused her of being a gold digger. They were 2 rats trapped on a sinking ship, turning on each other. And I watched it all, a silent observer, letting them stew in the poison they had created. But I knew this legal storm wasn't the final act. That was a matter for the courts. My final act had to be personal. It had to be a direct confrontation, on my terms, where the last of their lies would be stripped away. I needed to see the look in their eyes when they finally understood who had done this to them. I called the lawyer I had been quietly consulting for the past month, Patricia Hill. She was a sharp, no-nonsense woman in her 60s who specialized in high-conflict divorces. I had chosen her specifically because she had a reputation for being a shark. Patricia, it's Judith Carter, I said when she answered. Judith. I saw your husband's name in the paper. Quite the mess he's in, she said, her voice devoid of surprise. I take it we're ready to proceed? We are, I confirmed. But I don't want to just file the papers. I have a more direct approach in mind. I met her at her office the next day. I brought one of the encrypted hard drives with me. I laid out the whole story for her, from the moment Russell walked in with Brenda to the evidence I had collected on their affair, his financial crimes, and finally, Brenda's great secret. I played her the audio clip of Brenda admitting she didn't know who the father was. Patricia listened intently, her expression unreadable. When I was finished, she leaned back in her leather chair and was silent for a full minute. Good God, Judith, she said finally, a slow smile spreading across her face. In 30 years of doing this, I've seen some vindictive spouses. But you are a master craftsman. This is the most comprehensive, airtight case of marital misconduct and criminal leverage I have ever seen. His lawyer is trying to argue that all his assets are frozen, so there's nothing for me to take in the divorce, I said. He still thinks he can leave me with nothing. Patricia laughed, a short, sharp bark. Oh, that's adorable. He has no idea what's coming. That frozen asset argument won't hold up, especially when we prove he acquired those assets through criminal fraud. But this, she tapped the hard drive, this changes the game entirely. This isn't about money anymore. This is about total surrender. We spent the next hour mapping out the endgame. We drafted a divorce settlement agreement that was unlike any she had ever written. It wasn't about splitting assets. It stipulated that Russell would sign over the house, my business assets, and a small, legally protected retirement fund entirely to me. In exchange, he would have to sign a full, written confession, not just about the affair, but acknowledging Brenda's deception regarding the child's paternity. This confession would be a private document, but a powerful one. This is brutal, Judith, Patricia said, looking at me over her glasses. This is designed to utterly humiliate him. He threatened to destroy me in our own home, I replied, my voice steady. Humiliation is a kindness he doesn't deserve. He deserves consequences. She nodded, a look of profound respect in her eyes. All right then. Let's schedule a dinner party. I chose a Thursday night. I spent the day cooking, not out of any sense of duty, but as part of the stagecraft. I made his favorite meal, steak, garlic mashed potatoes, and asparagus. A last supper. Around 5 p.m., I went to find them. They were in the living room, sitting on opposite ends of the couch, wrapped in a thick, miserable silence. I think we need to talk, I said, my voice calm. All three of us. About our future and what comes next. I've made dinner. Let's sit down at the table, like adults, and figure this out. They looked at me, suspicious. My sudden desire for a civilized discussion was out of character with the silent ghost I had been for weeks. But they were desperate, trapped, and a part of them probably hoped I was about to offer some sort of olive branch. They agreed. We sat down at the dining room table. I served the food, poured the wine. The meal was excruciatingly tense. They picked at their food, avoiding my eyes. Finally, Russell cleared his throat. Look, Judith, he began, trying to sound reasonable. I know this has been difficult. But my lawyer says that with my current legal troubles, there's really no marital property left to divide. The government has it all. The best thing for you to do is just agree to a simple, uncontested divorce. I took a slow sip of my wine, letting him finish. I looked from his face to Brenda's. She was staring down at her plate, a picture of false fragility. You're right, Russell, I said quietly. We should talk about what's left. About the truth. And with that, I reached for a small remote control I had placed by my plate. I aimed it at the large, dark screen of the smart TV mounted on the living room wall, visible from the dining table. I pressed a button. The screen flickered to life. The first thing that appeared was a photo. A high-resolution shot of them kissing on our couch, dated and time-stamped. Brenda gasped. Russell's face went white. I've been upgrading the home security, I said conversationally as I took another bite of steak. The cloud storage is excellent. Then, I let the slideshow continue. Photos of them in the kitchen. In the hallway. Short video clips, silent at first, of their embraces. Their faces shifted from shock to horror. What is this, Judith? Russell stammered, his voice rising. Have you been spying on us? This is illegal. Is it? I asked, raising an eyebrow. Spying in my own home, on a security system you approved? I don't think so. But let's not get bogged down in legalities. Then, I unmuted the audio. The room was suddenly filled with their voices, the conversation I had recorded weeks ago. She's too boring to notice anything. Sometimes I think she's more in love with that workshop of hers than she ever was with me. Russell looked like he had been physically struck. Brenda stared at the screen, her mouth hanging open. But I was just getting started. The next file that opened was a screen recording of my journey through his computer. The folder named Old Tax Records. The password entry, Brenda's birthday. And then, the files themselves. The fake statements. The real ones. The names of his elderly clients. Mrs. Gable. Mr. Henderson. The evidence of his sickening fraud played out in stark black and white on the 65-inch screen. Russell leaped to his feet, his chair crashing backward onto the floor. Turn it off! Turn it off right now, he roared, his face purple with rage and terror. Sit down, Russell, I said, my voice dropping to a low, dangerous command. He froze, something in my tone stopping him cold. He slowly, shakily, sat back down. I saved the best for last. And then there's the matter of the baby, I said, my eyes locking onto Brenda's. The very foundation of this new life. I played the final file. The audio recording. Brenda's voice, clear as a bell, filled the silent room. Not a clue, her voice chirped from the speakers. Could be Russell, could be that bartender from the Salty Dog. Who cares? Russell's the one with the retirement accounts. He won the lottery. The silence that followed was absolute. It was the silence of a tomb. Russell slowly turned his head to look at Brenda. The look on his face was something I will never forget. It wasn't anger. It wasn't hurt. It was the look of a man whose entire world had just been revealed as a cheap, pathetic sham. The disgust in his eyes was total. I let them sit in that silence for a long, long moment. I watched the full weight of their betrayal, their lies, and their utter ruin settle upon them. I stood up, walked over to the TV, and turned it off. The screen went black, but their horrified faces were still reflected on its surface. I looked at the wreckage of the two people who had tried to destroy me. And I knew, in that moment, that I had one. CTA. If you're still listening, if this story resonates with you, please do me a favor. Like this video and comment with the number 1 down below. It lets me know that you've given me a like, and it tells me that you're right here with me on this journey. Your support is a bigger encouragement than you can possibly imagine. So please, comment with the number 1, and then listen as I tell you what happened next. After you've dropped a bomb, the noise is deafening, but the silence that comes after is heavier. That's what filled the dining room. It was thick with their shame, their shock, their hatred, not just for me, but for each other. I walked back to the table and calmly placed 2 documents and a pen on the polished wood surface, right between their plates of cold, uneaten steak. One was the divorce settlement agreement. The other was the confession Patricia and I had drafted. Here's the real final arrangement, Russell, I said, my voice cutting through the silence. This is a divorce settlement. It gives me the house, my business, my personal retirement fund, and full ownership of all remaining physical property. It leaves you with your clothes, your personal effects, and your mountain of legal debt. He stared at the papers as if they were written in a foreign language. You can't do this, he whispered, his voice hoarse. Oh, I can, I said. And you will sign it. You'll also sign this second document. It's a confession. In it, you'll acknowledge the full timeline of your affair with your stepsister, and you'll acknowledge that you were made aware that her child's paternity is, let's say, uncertain. It's for my personal records. Brenda let out a choked sob. Russell looked at me, a flicker of his old, defiant arrogance returning. And why would I ever sign these? You've already ruined me. What more can you do? I smiled, a cold, thin smile that didn't reach my eyes. That's a fair question. You see that hard drive connected to the TV? It contains everything we just watched, and more. A lot more. If you sign these papers tonight, without argument, that hard drive goes to my lawyer, Patricia Hill. She will hold it as insurance. But a copy of the evidence of your financial crimes is already with the authorities, as you know. I leaned in slightly, lowering my voice. However, if you don't sign, a second hard drive, currently sitting in a FedEx envelope, gets sent to a slightly different list of people tomorrow morning. It goes to the rest of your family, your parents, your sister. It goes to the AARP. It goes to every single person on your client list, so they can see exactly what you did with their life savings. And it goes to that bartender at the Salty Dog. I'm sure he'll be very interested in Brenda's big news. Brenda's head snapped up, her face a mess of tears and smeared makeup, sheer terror in her eyes. Russell looked from my face to the papers, then to Brenda, and then back to the papers. He was a chess player who had just realized he wasn't just in checkmate, his opponent had flipped the board over and set it on fire. He was utterly and completely beaten. The fight drained out of him, leaving a slumped, hollowed-out old man in its place. Without another word, he picked up the pen. His hand was shaking so violently he could barely hold it. He signed the divorce settlement. Then he signed the confession, not even reading it. He pushed the papers back across the table toward me. I picked them up, reviewed the signatures, and folded them neatly. Thank you for your cooperation, I said, my voice crisp and professional. Now, I want you both out of my house. Tonight. Out? Brenda wailed. But I have nowhere to go. I'm pregnant. That sounds like a personal problem, I said, turning my back on her to address Russell. She's your responsibility. Take her with you. I don't care where you go. A hotel. Your parents' house. But you have 15 minutes to pack a bag and get out of my sight. After that, you will be trespassing. I left them there and went down to my workshop. I didn't watch them leave. I didn't need to. I just sat in the quiet dark, listening to the sounds from upstairs. The frantic opening and closing of drawers. The muffled, angry sobs. The heavy tread of them carrying suitcases down the stairs. And finally, the sound of the front door opening and then closing for the last time. And then, silence. A profound, echoing silence. The house was mine again. The air felt lighter. I should have felt triumphant. I should have felt a surge of elation. But I didn't. I just felt empty. The war was over. The battle was won. But the battlefield was the home I had loved for 23 years, and I was the only one left standing in the ashes. The 6 months that followed were a blur of legal proceedings. True to her word, Patricia handled everything with ruthless efficiency. The divorce was finalized quickly. Russell, facing a mountain of federal charges, had no fight left in him. His confession, though private, made the legalities of the separation incredibly simple. He was sentenced to 15 years in federal prison for fraud and embezzlement. I heard through the grapevine that his parents, horrified by the scandal, had disowned him. Brenda vanished. A week after they left my house, Russell apparently kicked her out. Last I heard, she had her baby and was living with her mother a few states away, trying to piece her life back together. I felt nothing for her. She was a ghost from a life that was no longer mine. I had the house. I had my business. I had my financial independence. I had one. But living in that house felt wrong. Every room held a memory, and now every memory was tainted. The foyer was the site of the ambush. The dining room was the scene of the final confrontation. The living room couch was a monument to their betrayal. It wasn't a home anymore, it was a museum of pain. For weeks, I tried to reclaim it. I rearranged the furniture. I repainted the walls. But it was no use. The ghosts were too loud. One day, I was in the workshop, cleaning. I looked at the bank of monitors, now dark. I had dismantled the surveillance system the day after they left. My tools were all in their place. Everything was fixed, but I felt broken. And I knew, with a sudden, gut-wrenching certainty, that this was one thing I couldn't fix. It had to be replaced. The next day, I called a realtor. Selling the house I had spent over 2 decades building and perfecting was one of the hardest things I've ever had to do. It was like amputating a part of myself. I spent weeks packing up my life into cardboard boxes. I went through old photo albums, my fingers tracing the smiling faces of 2 people who didn't exist anymore. I allowed myself to grieve, not for the man Russell became, but for the man I thought he was, and for the future I thought we had. I found a small, new-build townhouse in a quiet neighborhood about 30 miles away. It was clean, modern, and blessedly empty of memories. The day I moved, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders I hadn't even realized I was carrying. My workshop was smaller, but it was mine. I set up my tools, organized my workbench, and for the first time in a long time, I felt a flicker of something that wasn't anger or grief. It felt like peace. Life became quiet. I focused on my work. My business, Carter Home Systems, began to thrive. My reputation for quality work and reliability spread. I took on new clients, bigger projects. I worked long hours, finding solace in the logic of blueprints and the satisfaction of a job well done. I was healing, slowly, brick by brick, the way you rebuild a foundation. I was alone, but I wasn't lonely. I was rediscovering myself, Judith Carter, not as a wife, but as a woman. And I was starting to like her. A year after the divorce was final, I landed the biggest contract of my career, designing and installing the complete smart home and security systems for a new upscale commercial and residential development. It was a massive project, and it brought me face to face with the head of the construction company that was building it, a man named Gerald Monroe. Gerald was in his early 60s, with kind, crinkling eyes and a calm, steady presence. He was a builder, a man who, like me, understood the world through blueprints and foundations. Our initial meetings were all business. We'd go over schematics, discuss wiring routes, and debate the pros and cons of different security protocols. He was sharp, professional, and respected my expertise without a hint of condescension. It was refreshing. One afternoon, we were in his on-site trailer, reviewing a change order. He was looking over my proposal for the residential security package. "This is good, Judith," he said, tapping a finger on the blueprint. "Thorough. You believe in protecting what's important." "I do," I said simply. He looked up at me, a thoughtful expression on his face. "Trust is hard to rebuild once it's broken, isn't it?" The comment was so unexpected, so personal, that it caught me off guard. "Yes, it is," I managed to say. I looked at him, and I decided to take a small risk. "Some things can't be rebuilt," I added quietly. "They can only be replaced." A slow smile spread across his face. A genuine, warm smile. "You sound like you speak from experience." "I do," I admitted. "That's how it started." our coffee breaks got longer. Our business meetings would often drift into conversations about life, about our pasts. He told me about his own painful divorce years ago, how his ex-wife had been dishonest with their finances, leaving him to pick up the pieces. He spoke without bitterness, only a quiet sadness and the strength of a man who had survived and rebuilt. He was nothing like Russell. Where Russell had been slick and arrogant, Gerald was solid and humble. Where Russell saw people as assets to be managed, Gerald saw them as partners. He was straightforward, honest, and had a gentle sense of humor that made me laugh for the first time in what felt like a lifetime. One Friday, after a long week, he asked if I'd like to get dinner. Not a business dinner. A real dinner. I hesitated for only a moment. Fear is a prison, and I was done with being a prisoner. I said yes. We went to a quiet Italian restaurant. We talked for hours. It was easy, comfortable. There were no games, no pretense. Just two people who understood the scars the other carried. Towards the end of the meal, he reached across the table and gently covered my hand with his. For what it's worth, he said, his voice soft. I'm glad you're learning to build again. And in that moment, I realized I wasn't just building security systems anymore. I was building a new life. Our relationship grew slowly, naturally, like a well-tended garden. There was no rush, no pressure. We were two adults who understood that the strongest structures are built on a solid, carefully laid foundation. About 6 months into our relationship, on a quiet Sunday afternoon as we sat on the porch of my townhouse, I decided to tell him everything. I told him about Russell, about Brenda, about the cameras, the keylogger, the anonymous emails, and the final, brutal confrontation in the dining room. I didn't spare any details. I needed him to know who I was, what I was capable of when pushed to the brink. He listened patiently, his gaze never leaving my face. He didn't interrupt, didn't flinch. When I finished, the whole ugly story hanging in the air between us, he was quiet for a long time. I held my breath, a knot of fear tightening in my stomach. I thought he might look at me differently, see me as someone cold, cruel, vengeful. You did what you had to do to survive, he said finally, his voice full of a deep, unwavering empathy. He declared war on you in your own home, Judith. You just fought back with better weapons. He took my hand. I'm not proud of the anger I felt during my own divorce. I spent months fantasizing about revenge. But I never did anything. You built a plan and you executed it. I can't say I blame you. Tears welled in my eyes, tears of relief. To be seen, to be understood, after all that time, was a powerful, healing balm. But I'm glad, he continued, squeezing my hand gently, that you're not that angry person anymore. He was right. The anger, the cold, calculating rage that had fueled me for so long, was gone. It had served its purpose. It had been the sledgehammer I needed to demolish a rotten, unsalvageable structure. But you can't live your life with a sledgehammer in your hand. Sooner or later, you have to put it down and pick up the tools you need to build. I had learned the grim, exhausting art of destruction. I learned how to tear things down, how to expose secrets and leave your enemies with nothing but the wreckage of their own choices. It was a necessary education. But I also learned that demolition, however justified, is never the end goal. The real work, the work that matters, is what comes after. The slow, patient construction of something honest and strong. I looked at Gerald, at his kind face and his strong, calloused hands that had spent a lifetime building things, and I knew that I had finally put my weapon down. The revenge was a cold dish that didn't satisfy the way I thought it would. It didn't heal what was broken. It just cleared the way for something new. The real satisfaction was here, now, in the quiet peace of a Sunday afternoon, holding the hand of a good man. Last spring, Gerald and I stood on a beautiful, tree-lined plot of land overlooking a small lake. He had bought it years ago, always intending to build his own home there, but the time had never been right. What do you think? He asked, sweeping his arm out towards the view. Big enough for a house and a decent-sized workshop? I smiled, a real, unburdened smile. I think it's perfect. We've spent the last year designing it together. We've pored over blueprints, debated layouts, and chosen materials. It's a true partnership. He designs the structure, the bones of the house, and I design its nervous system, the wiring, the network, the security. A few weeks ago, after the foundation was poured and the framing was up, we walked through what would one day be our living room. The late afternoon sun streamed through the open studs, casting long shadows on the subfloor. It smelled of fresh-cut lumber and possibility. Gerald ran his hand along a wooden frame. So, Madam Security Expert, he said, a playful glint in his eye. What kind of system are you planning for this place? Are we going to have cameras in every corner? Motion sensors? A laser grid? I laughed. The usual, I said. Good cameras on the exterior, sensors on the doors and windows, smart locks. The basics. Enough to keep us safe. He smiled. Good. I want to feel safe, but I don't want to live in a fortress. No fortresses, I agreed, slipping my hand into his. Just a home. As we stood there, in the skeleton of the house we were building together, I thought about the difference between this place and the one I had shared with Russell. They were both just wood and nails and wires. But that house had been built on a foundation of secrets and lies. This one was being built on truth. On shared choices instead of hidden betrayals. On hope instead of fear. Some things can't be fixed. I learned that lesson in the cruelest way possible. But I also learned that some things can be built from scratch, better and stronger than what came before. I'm still Judith Carter. I still fix things for a living. But now I know the most important things in life aren't the things you repair. They're the things you build. Thank you so much for listening to my story. It wasn't easy to tell, but sharing it has been a part of my healing. If you have a story of your own, about rebuilding, about finding strength after betrayal, I'd be honored if you shared a piece of it in the comments below. Let's create a community of survivors. And please, don't forget to like and subscribe, so we can continue to share these important stories together. Be well, and be strong.